How long would it take for the fullness of the Gentiles to come in? The prophet Ezekiel was told to lie on one side for 390 days for the number of years Yahweh would punish Israel, and on the other side for 40 days for the years of Yehuda's discipline. In Jeremiah, Yahweh doubled Ephraim's sentence. Leviticus also says that if we would not repent, he'd increase our punishment 7 times. We can look at this as two sentences running concurrently for Ephraim. The first ran out around AD 46, when Paul began his mission to the so-called Gentiles. Individuals from Ephraim began responding to Yeshua, and Hosea's judgment of no pity was no longer in effect. But Hosea's other sentence, that of not being a people, lasted 2,730 years, and it was not up until 1996, if we count from the first dispersion, or 2008, if we start from the final destruction of the northern capital. That's why the scales are only now being removed from our eyes. But this creates a new problem, because once we see more truth, we can't help but realize that we have inherited doctrines that were bent from their original shape. Because when our ancestors forgot they were Hebrews, they lost track of what the gospel really is. Yeshua often referred to it as the gospel of the kingdom. When he met two of his followers after his resurrection and they didn't recognize him, the way they described Yeshua to this stranger was, "We thought he was going to restore the kingdom to Israel." Yet today, is there a single denomination among those who claim to follow him which defines that as their goal? When the disciples asked Yeshua, "Is it now that you are going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" he didn't deny that this was his intention. When he said, "It's not for you to know when, but you will be my witnesses," what he was doing was turning his disciples' focus toward the first step in that process, finding his long-lost relatives, and again turning them into people worthy to be its citizens. For a king needs subjects in order to have a kingdom. While he said his kingdom was not of this age, in the age to come he intended it to be not just a spiritual kingdom, but a literal one, and they certainly understood their job to be making sure that age arrived as quickly as possible. And when they went out among the other nations, where did they go to look for them? In the synagogues, because the spirit of holiness was already drawing them back into a realization that they had to be somehow connected with Israel. The apostles soon reported that many were returning to Yahweh from among the Gentiles. Those who were once far off were being brought near again. And Daniel had already defined those who were far off as a part of Israel, who were driven away because of their unfaithfulness. That is, they were once under the covenant, but had then alienated themselves from it. The Epistle to the Hebrews says explicitly that the reason for the Messiah's death was to provide redemption for those who had violated the earlier covenant. The Hebrew phrase that's commonly translated New Testament is better rendered as renewed covenant. Not something never seen before, but a renewal of the same contract. The gospel is that Yahweh was still willing to renew it despite our unfaithfulness. And Jeremiah specified that this covenant would be with the house of Yisrael and the house of Yehuda. No one else is mentioned. Even James, who at first hesitated to allow these supposed Gentiles into the household, later addressed his epistle overtly to the 12 tribes of Israel who were scattered abroad. So if Yeshua's followers see themselves as anything other than Yisrael, they will never accomplish the work he left for them to do. When he said his students would be fishers of men, Yeshua was reminding them of a prophecy in Jeremiah 16. He was sending them out with a dragnet to draw Ephraim back into the covenant they once forsook. In the process of finding them, other kinds of fish were pulled in too, which allowed Israel, even while in exile, to be a light to all nations. This extension of the kingdom to complete Gentiles was more of an afterthought, though, an added gift to Yeshua, since Yahweh said he had earned the right to rule more than just Yisrael. And this exception to the rule has ended up being seen as the norm. The focus on regathering Yisrael got lost in the push to spread what was turning out to be seen as a new religion rather than the call back into the same covenant they had abandoned. That's why Yeshua wondered if he would even find the faith as he knew it still in existence when he returned. He said his kingdom would be like a field full of high-quality seed. But an enemy also sowed a different crop here, one that looks exactly the same, until the harvest, when it proves inedible and useless. In Yeshua's absence, his brother Yaakov, often called James, was successor to King David's position, though he too never held a throne as such. When Paul let his pearls get into the hands of those who did not have his background as a Torah scholar to give them a context by which to know the limits of how far his words should be taken, Yaakov reined him back in, with a reminder to make it clear that faith is evidenced by what we do, so he wouldn't attract the wrong audience. Paul himself did accept the correctives, but some had already taken his earlier writings far beyond what he intended. As Peter said, unstable and unlearned men were twisting Paul's words, since he wasn't careful enough to avoid being misunderstood. When the political winners wrote the history books, the Romans took Paul's words to mean something very different from what he meant, and this is what turned into the Christianity we are more familiar with today.